Welcome to this afternoon session. My name is Paul Holter, and I'm a designer at a developers conference. And I just have to start by saying how truly relieved I was to see that I actually have a crowd, because this is crazy. This competition here, this 10-track competition. And I look at all the other subjects that are going in parallel here, and they look so super specific. I have no idea what most of those are, but it must be very, very interesting. So thank you guys for choosing user experience. I haven't even started, and I'm already relieved. I feel that this was a success already, so thanks. So user experience for professionals. I think that user experience has been established as a key success factor for consumer solutions for a really, really long time. Whereas when it comes to business or professional environments, this is a revolution that is over us right now and has already become a very, very important ingredient when it comes to achieving user performance, coming across as a robust and high-quality company, and even in terms of communicating your brand value. So I'm going to try to structure this talk in three. I'm going to start with why we will never again get away with a poor user experience. So I've been in this game for approximately 15 years now, and oh my God, how much this has changed since I started in 2003. I've been lucky enough to work along with some of these serious industrial innovators in Norway and internationally, and it's remarkable to have seen how things are different now than they were in 2003. My personal story in 2003 was that I was a master's student when I met this guy. He works in Simrad, or Kongsberg. Anyone here from Kongsberg or Simrad? Oh, very good. You probably don't know this guy. It's a very big company, but he was back in 2003 a design pioneer in an engineering company that didn't really work much with designers. He had had some success with industrial design. They're making troll instrumentation. So they found out that because this troll equipment needs handling from a lot of people, it makes sense to use an industrial designer to accommodate for a better usage of these instruments. So you could grab them more easily and put them in the charger more easily and attach them to the trolling net and all of those kind of things. And this was a great success, and he received awards and everything. So I think he got motivated, and he looked at all his user interfaces, and he saw that the user interfaces aren't really living up to the standard of my products. This is an echo sounder. And here's their sonar. And this is their trolling instrumentation, which was at that time, cutting-edge user experience for an engineering or high-tech environment. And it's quite interesting. And not only are they kind of, designed by engineers for professional users, you can see that they haven't really been touched by designer hands, but they also look nothing like each other. Like they're the three completely different universes of a visual language that was then. So he tried to sell the idea of working with user experience for these professional user interfaces, but he had a really hard time. But then he met me. I was a master's student, meaning I was for free. So that was what it took. I had to lower the threshold to 0, and then I was allowed to work with these kind of things. And 2 years later, we had the result, and the result received a design award. It got a lot of attention in the company as well, because it was the first example of design for their user interfaces within the company. Even though I have to admit, I think it was a bit limited by the kind of technology they were using. The finishing was not something I was very proud of. And honestly speaking, I guess the design work was a bit mediocre as well. However, I was a master's student, so it was maybe not a big surprise. I tried to advocate that it should be a touch user interface, but the response was, come on, it's going to be used on a ship bridge by rough hands, and they don't want no sissy neck touch technology. It's not reliable, we don't want it. But then something happened. Steve Jobs happened. And this was in 2007, so just a few years later. And this happening is more impactful for user experience than you might think. I've been talking to futurists and PhD people who have been doing research on this, and they say that the 3 innovations through the history of humankind that have had the largest impact on human behavior is quite epic. The first one, 200,000 years ago, we learned how to control fire. 9,000 years ago, we invented the wheel. And the last one, and the most impactful one of all of those 3, is the smartphone, 10 years ago. Think about that for a moment. It's extremely impactful. Maybe the most impactful thing that has ever happened in the history of human behavior. And it's all propelled by user experience. This is a company that has focused on user experience rather than technology. And this was great news for everyone working with user experience. It was the golden age for me. This is a picture of me in the wake of this golden age, enjoying getting more freedom, working with touch displays on ship bridges. What used to be Sissy-neck technology was now obligatory for ship bridges. So Kongsberg did something that I find very brave. They designed something called the K-Master, and I was proudly a part of that, which is the first example of that company's innovation projects that were driven by design rather than technology. So it was the user experience that was driving the development of this. And this is very interesting. And later on, and I think that Kongsberg is one of the most, I think they were rated now quite recently as one of the most innovative companies in Norway, because they're quite brave and forward-leaning when it comes to doing this kind of innovation. And I've been working quite a lot with Kongsberg later on. Sometimes it looks like this. They found out K-Master is setting the standard, but all the other applications are looking very differently from one another. So we did something called design system work. Does anybody have experience working with design systems here? Some of you. It's quite interesting. It's a way to make consistent user experience available across many different kinds of surfaces. So what we did here is that we took all the sheets of paper that you see here on the left-hand side, represent different applications from the subsea part of Kongsberg Maritime. So we started analyzing what do they have in common, which of them are good, which of them are crappy, what is unique about them, and how can we try to kind of cluster the functionality so that we can make a common look and feel. And it resulted in something like this, where even though they're quite different from one another, we could make a common language that would ensure high quality user experience in all their applications. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. What is interesting is that taking it back to industrial design, because interaction design competency actually is derived out of the industrial design methodology. It's very cool now to be able to work on all touch points, both digital and physical, if you're in one of those environments like that, because for the user, they need the language and the symbols and the colors and all the effects that we're using to be as consistent as possible for the result to be as simple to use as possible. So, but Kongsberg is not alone. This company called Ulstein, they created a bridge vision in collaboration with the School of Design and Architecture. It's a fantastic vision, got a lot of attention, opened doors for many innovators out there. A couple of years later, Vard had a display at Nord Shipping, where not only the ship bridge, but the entire ship itself, and all the rooms and all the different parts of the ship were designed in a consistent way. So the entire ship, with all its instrumentation, consistent from a user experience point of view. And I think that's pretty cool, the big change that has happened through these years. There's a person called Leah Bewley, who is a design researcher. And in 2015, she published and presented the result of some research that she did, trying to find out what is the correlation between the way companies work with design and user experience and their capacity to change and create profit. And it was quite remarkable what she found at that time. This presentation is available online, by the way, so it's possible to go and look at the entire presentation. But the conclusion is that she's clustering this in companies that are so-called outdated in the ways that they're using designers in their innovation processes, those that are progressing, and those that are modern. And what is categorizing the modern organizations is that designers are working holistically. They're taking part in forming the company's vision and strategy. They're allowed to do deep insight, and they're working with experience and not just wireframes. And designers are even involved or part of the executive leadership of these companies. And this is quite interesting when you think about the transition from just a few years back. So why is this? Why has this happened? And I think that there are three main reasons. First main reason, Generation Y now grew up. The guys that were small with technology, gaming, internet, they are now decision makers within their companies. They have different expectations. They believe that if it's not a good experience, it's meaningless. It's quite interesting. All of this happened during these last few years. Second reason is what I like to call the perfect technology storm. These maturing technologies, these are not the future anymore. This is not science fiction anymore. It's all happening, and it's happening simultaneously. And it's a big race, and there are a lot of buzzwords. But the game changers are the ones that are able to create holistic, meaningful, and good, valuable solutions adapted to the user's needs. I think Tesla is a good example of that, managing to take new technologies, focusing, meanwhile, on design, working on them in parallel in a good integrated way. And a colleague of mine has a talk on Friday who's going to talk more about this perfect technology storm at 9 o'clock on Friday in room 9, if you're interested. It's very interesting. The third reason is that globalization is a megatrend. A megatrend is a trend that has happened for at least 10 years and is going to continue happening for at least another 10 years. So it's not guesswork. We know that globalization is happening, and this means something. It means that competition is changing. It means that Western companies, for example, are facing new challenges when it comes to low-price alternatives. For example, within the maritime industries, which means, again, you have to differentiate yourself. The quality that you represent has to be more present in your products. You can't get away with crappy UX anymore. So, I'm a designer. I just want to explain this phenomenon, design. Design has changed. And you'll understand why I need to explain this. So I'm going to give you a brief evolution of design. So long time ago, let's say a long time ago, design was primarily associated with form and craft, right? Some problem solving maybe, but it's associated with aesthetics. So that's where we came from, in a way. But as the products grew a little bit more complex over time, we started with what we call creative problem solving. It's very popular to call this design thinking. So design thinking means you accumulate a lot of insight when it comes to people, when it comes to technology, and when it comes to business. And then the designer's job is to solve problems within the cross-section of those three. So as designers started working with more complexity and started working with visualizing this complexity, resolving this complexity, and finding simpler solutions, it became increasingly popular then to use designers for even more strategic work, what I call the big picture. So if you take this development of design that we used to be pot makers and furniture makers, and all of a sudden, I mean, they're using designers now, even in politics, to gather insights and creating really good, holistic ways of resolving complexity. So what I like to say is that working with user experience, you can't look at it in isolation from all the other dimensions. I believe really that all of those three, it's not like the evolution where you go from some kind of fish animal to a man. So it's not like the first part of the evolution is obsolete. I really think that all of these things are still very important to work with in parallel. I think to get a holistic impact, you need to work at all these three levels in parallel. Also, this is the reason why design is so often misunderstood, because a lot of people are talking about design and misunderstanding on which level you're talking. So it's good to have this as a vocabulary. So usually we try to package our approaches along the lines of these three levels. So for example, you see user experience there, but you see many other kinds of approaches that is related to user experience that you need to work with in combination with each other. So I'm going to get back to some examples from these offerings later in the presentation. But first, I'm going to take us to the next part of the presentation, how UX for professionals is fundamentally different from UX for consumers, and why it's important to understand the difference. So first, it's a really blurry line, I think, between design for professional and consumers, because there are a lot of solutions that are kind of in between. But for sake of the example, I'm going to talk a little bit about the extremes. So, first of all, the users are different. In a professional environment, the users are very often trained. And very often they will use these applications maybe for many hours every day. So it has a high impact on their lives, their work lives. Whereas for consumers, call the users casual users. Sometimes they will use it only once. You can call it disposable user interfaces. You use it only once, and like a campaign, you use it once and then you never see it, and you never want to see it again. It was a one-time experience. Second of all, the purpose of these applications. Typically for professionals, you have a task that you're going to do related to either production, you're going to monitor something, there are safety issues maybe to look after, and collaboration tools as well that are becoming more and more important. Whereas on the consumer side, the sole purpose is to increase consumption. When it comes to the desired experience that you want to create, for professionals, it's something called situation awareness or system awareness. You have to feed the user with an understanding of what's going on, because that's the platform you have for decision making. And then once you take a decision, it needs to be efficient. We have to accommodate for a good workflow. Whereas for consumers, it has to be intuitive, and then it's typically full of call to actions. A consumer user interface without a call to action is not a very good consumer interface, because without the call to action, you're not going to consume anything. And then you need to convert, of course, which means purchase in most cases. There's a desired behavior as well, where I think for professional user interfaces to increase the performance and to reduce human error. Sometimes you can just automate the things that the humans don't need to do. Whereas for consumer interfaces, consumer loyalty is important. In extreme cases, you would even try to achieve addiction, for example, through gamification. You don't want ever the user to leave your interface. You just want them to continue and continue consuming. And then the sharing part has become very, very important, because this now replaces traditional marketing and advertisement. It's the sharing of user experiences that is the new marketing. And when it comes to the constraints, it's a little bit different as well, because sometimes for professional user interfaces, you have to work with, for example, class requirements, and there are some conventions you need to follow, otherwise you're going to lose your users, or you're not going to get your applications approved for that kind of usage. Whereas for the consumers, even though you have to relate to certain rules, you want to make it completely barrier-free. You want it to be smooth. So what are the consequences of these differences? One consequence that I find, and I have always found a little bit challenging, is this. A lot of people within the professional environments feel that design is bullshit. I think they're a dying race. But they're there, and I think a lot of those people have either misunderstood the role of a designer in these processes, or they have a bad experience. That bad experience might well come from having used a B2C designer for a B2B job. If you use a B2C designer for a B2B job, you can blame yourself for having a poor result. Because then you're going to have a designer that is going to have call to actions and convert and all of those kind of things in an environment that has nothing to do with call to action and all of those things. So it's a very important thing to differentiate what kind of goals you're trying to achieve, right? And there's another result from this as well. This is a book called High Performance HMI Handbook. Is anyone familiar with this book? I think some years ago, this used to be the Bible for people working with human-machine interfaces for professional environments, because the authors of this book have done a really, really good job at teaching you how you can take large amounts of data and put it into graphs that human mind is able to comprehend quicker, and they could prove it scientifically. So this became the standard that everyone wanted. Now, I think this is really crappy. I think they've done a great job with the information density and graphs and all of those things, but I still don't think they succeed, because I believe that in 2018, as I say here, all UX, even for professional environments, have to be lovable. Lovability is what we have to work for, also for professional environments. I was lucky enough to work in a project for Rolls-Royce some time ago, and I think it's a good example. It's a good case to demonstrate someone who has understood the importance of making the user experience lovable. So Rolls-Royce is a company that has a very strong brand, a brand that has been built very much through their car or motor part of their industry, whereas the other part of the company that are working with motors and engines and maritime equipment isn't equally sexy. Now, they've had to do something about this. So when we worked with them some years ago, we had the task to work systemically with all this instrumentation on a ship bridge and try to unify it and create a good user experience. So our process was quite standard as a designer task. Do user insight, build an overview, try to decompose it into something a little bit more simpler and possible to understand, design it, verify and evaluate it, and then we were going to create something called CLF, Common Look and Feel, because they wanted a unified user interface across all these applications. Now, this was in an environment that is still quite rough and is still quite restricted with all class requirements and stuff that we needed to follow. But still, they wanted us to push the boundaries. And also, the designers working on this, you know, it's not the designer's dream job, typically, to work with a kind of user interface that nobody will ever see except a couple of guys on a boat. But this is about safety, and it's about something that is really important and has an impact on people's work life. So working with these kind of things, you have to understand, like, it's been my job to motivate these designers to find this a lovable job to do, because I think it's very important. But it's a change of mindset that is required to succeed with these kinds of tasks. So these two girls are colleagues of mine, and they have been working and done a tremendous job on understanding all the different little bits and pieces of this user interface. And they have created a common look and feel guide across all these applications. This is just a little part of it, and zooming in on some of it, trying to create new conventions and new standards of how you can use design elements and achieve design elements that are both attractive and still in line with the requirements that you need to get to. Rolls-Royce achieved their unified bridge experience, where for the poor user, if you need to work with one interface and you jump to the other interface, and then you have a completely different logic, and you're trying to save somebody's life or do something really, really important, having this common look and feel across all these user interfaces is actually important. And Rolls-Royce, they were serious enough to implement this with big attention to detail, which was great. And I really, really appreciated the attention to detail that I did not experience in 2003. It takes something for developers to really work on those details. And I appreciate that. It takes time, and it takes some iterations, and it also means something in terms of choice of technology. So Rolls-Royce said that, okay, so now we've made these user interfaces for the ship bridges, but we want to bring our interface into the cloud. In the cloud, we have no restrictions. We can do whatever we want, and we want it to be even sexier than this. This kind of looks 2012. So this is the first time ever that I have experienced working with an engineering company that are challenging us as a design company, saying, no, it's not sexy enough. We want it sexier. We want it cooler. And maybe it's because their name is Rolls-Royce, but it was really cool. Then we started working with the cloud interface. We started working with colors and tried to make it pop a little bit more. And it was very nice to work with something that would really be an eye-opener to anyone, even those working with the consumer interfaces. And this was also implemented now with great accuracy. Available on mobile, big attention to the details on the GUI. We worked with transitions, all of those things, information displays. And all of a sudden, this became a cooler job to do even for the designers. And we built a design system so that you could get a consistent look and feel across all the different applications here as well. So now you have a system where it's much easier for Rolls-Royce as a company to regenerate something that is consistent across all the interfaces. So, which takes me to the last and most interesting part, I think. The secrets to make lovable UX for professionals. You ready for the secrets? They're not going to be so secret anymore, though. All right. So, I try to turn this into 4 cornerstones that are, in a way, spinning around this core of building and learning, which is almost taken for granted nowadays. And the first one, I'm afraid, is a little bit of a preach. Dare to influence. I have a hero. My hero is called Mike Montero. Has anyone heard of him? I think he's more famous in the domain of design. But he talks to designers and developers. He's a very popular talker in many different conferences, and he's extremely entertaining to listen to. But he is teaching designers and developers to sell. He says that everyone has to sell. And he has a quote that I love so much. He says that everything that helps you do your job is part of your job. We're in 2018. Self-leadership. Like, if you're the kind of person, and he uses this gif of a designer raising her eyes, saying that, oh, we're so good at raising our eyes, and saying that we didn't know, or it was my fault, or I didn't get the brief right, or something like that. So he's trying to teach to take responsibility and influence whatever you can in your team, your leaders, and so forth. And what I realized that because everything is happening faster, the young ones are very often more skillful than the old ones. So who is going to move the old ones in the right direction? Do we dare to do it, even if we don't have the experience to do it? It's our responsibility. I think there are 3 kinds of pitfalls or characters that you can meet in your organization where your influencing skills are very important. One is this guy, the expert, the design is bullshit person. He hears the word design and he gets cold sweat. Because he knows best, he feels that change is risky, and he feels, honestly, that design is a little bit gay. It's something his wife would talk about. He doesn't want to touch it. And the expert that is really, really afraid of things not being his way is almost per definition someone who's going to stop innovation and stop change. So it's worth spending your influencing skills on this guy. The second guy is the little king. Now, the little king only exists in large organizations. But in the large organizations, very often they're split into divisions, right? And if you want to make a good user experience nowadays, it has to be holistic. It has to be consistent. You can't work in silos anymore. You need to make it all come together. So if you then have a little king saying, well, you can say what you want, but I'm just going to keep things the way they are, and I'm not going to say anything, I'm just going to do it like that because I decide here in this little department of my organization. Has anyone experienced small kings? I mean, there are quite a few of them that I've met out there. It can be a little bit hard to spot because they like to decide without saying so. Now, which brings me to the last character that I like to call the crocodile. So the crocodile is a funny animal. It's supposed to not be seen until it kills you. And I think that there are quite a lot of important people in important positions around in the companies that are easily overseen until the point of the ultimate decision, in which they jump out and they had a completely different idea and nobody knew about it. And you wasted so many hours and so much time because they weren't involved. So I'm saying use influencing skills, get these out in the open. One way of doing it is to assemble people and have co-creation sessions and make sure all the most difficult people are part of those co-creation sessions where both developers and designers work together. The leaders are there, the business people are there. Definitely the crocodiles should be there because then they're out in the open and they can't take you afterwards. The little kings should be there and make them commit. Do something in that workshop where they commit to something, principles, for example, so that later on you could say, but we've been working according to these principles. I know that this is, it's a bit of a preach, but a lot of the good results actually happen in these kind of trenches. So the second milestone is to zoom out. Learn how to zoom out. There are many ways to zoom out. Back to this triangle. One is to think about the service strategy. I think the user experience is very much related to that. Service strategy. Working with service design. Here is one way to define it. The process of identifying needs and orchestrating touch points that lead to delightful experiences. Very good. This is the service design hamburger that we call it. So when working with service design, you need to understand all your stakeholders. You need to understand all the touch points that they have to your organization. You also need to understand what is backstage, all the touch points in your organization that will accommodate for that service, and all the people and stakeholders within the organization that is going to make those touch points happen again. And in the middle, you have your service strategy. I have an example. Again, for Kongsberg, we did a service design approach to try to find out this very, very complex organization and all the different touch points and all the people in this organization. And we made this kind of swim lane journey that you're not supposed to be able to understand based on this picture, but it's to point out how complex it is. And the interesting part is that nobody in such a big company, that like sometimes I hear they say, if Kongsberg only knew what Kongsberg knows. But that's not possible because it's too complex and there are too many roles and too many hats. So we need to make this overviews, zoom out, and all the red little dots while doing insight represent a problem. There's a problem here, space for improvement. So we tried to simplify it a little bit. So when you're going to design something new for a ship, zoom out, understand the life cycle of the entire ship, understand that there are different phases. So this goes from 5 years before it's seaborne, through the planning and the specification, design, ordering, shipbuilding process. and then it's seaborne, and then the ship is in operation for about 30 years, and then it's going to be scrapped. Like, during this lifetime, there are different stakeholders involved. The ship owner is going to be there. Could be that the ship owner changes along the way, but before it's seaborne, it's the yard that makes the decisions, seen from Kongsberg perspective. And in Kongsberg, it's the sales that are doing all the things before it's shipborne, and then it's global customer support that is doing it afterwards, but then all the players are changing. So by seeing the world from this perspective, when you're talking about what you're making and for whom, it's much easier to point out where are we going to make a difference, who are we going to create a value for, and what are the challenges that we need to overcome to succeed doing this. Then you have zoomed out and you're much better equipped to ask the right kind of questions. So then you can build a service strategy that could look, for example, like this, where you articulate during these 4 phases of the ship lifecycle, you articulate what do you want your customer to experience while being in touch with our organization during these phases. And on the 3rd line there, you say, what do we need to do as an organization to achieve this experience? And if you can make stakeholders commit to this service strategy, then other decisions are going to be much easier later on. So that's one. Future Lab is another big way to zoom out. Using these megatrends I told you about, globalization, there are 13 of these megatrends that we know are going to happen, and it's possible to use them to fuel innovation processes. And creative processes are much more fun when you put future into the equation, because then you can be a little bit bolder. So one way of working with future is that you find subtrends, again with this in the Kongsberg project, and you can distribute them on an axis of the degree of uncertainty that is going to happen and the degree of impact that is going to have on your project. So if it has a high degree of certainty and a high degree of impact, there's no point designing a future without those trends being included. And I think everyone then can agree on that. So based on that, you can make future scenarios, which fuels ideation. Here we started ideating on the consequences of using this in Kongsberg's case. Lots of different ideas. Not going to go, don't have time to go through them now. We cluster them, sorry about that. We cluster them into value propositions, and we made little films to communicate further up in the organization what kind of value propositions we wanted to innovate and build user experiences around. So this is just a small clip from one of them. Should be sound now? I'll play it again.
All ships that are equipped with Kongsberg Merchant Marine systems are connected, each sending data onshore for reporting and optimizing performance. Kongsberg Merchant Marine acts as a full service provider for ship owners, an extension of Fleet at Web.
Yeah, so by zooming out and telling these kind of stories, making decisions on a high level first, then it's much easier then to work on concrete user interfaces which are playing a part in this bigger story afterwards. Because then everyone will know what is the purpose of this and what value is it going to create and for whom, and based on which subtrends that we know are going to happen and we know are going to have a big impact on our solutions. Another one that I like to mention is the user insight. The designers have always been the ambassador of user insight. I think it's kind of interesting now in the business-to-business context to look at the difference between how human-machine interfaces used to be. Like, this is the classic model where you have any kind of industry and you put typically a large amount of money into that industry, and there's some kind of success factor or effect coming out of that industry. And if there's a user who can influence the amount of success coming out, it's a good idea to accommodate for a good user experience. It makes sense from a business perspective. But the modern human-machine interface macro perspective is more complicated than that. It's not so easy. There are many different kinds of connectivities and stakeholders that are going to make it much harder to figure out what it takes to make success. So sometimes we're working with these stakeholder maps. Again, another illustration where it's impossible to understand. But here we've taken a a circle divided into 3, understanding that you have a cluster of end users. You also have external users or third-party users, and many different ones of those. And then you even have internal users within the company. Remembering the service hamburger, there are users within your company that you need to succeed with this. And all the little text around it is listing up all the needs that we need to accommodate for all of these users to be served through our new systems. So this is a stakeholder map we made for an ERP redesign we did for a company called Power Office. Power Office's user interface used to look like this. This is actually not all that many years ago. And their logo looked like that, a little swoosh, and Power Office, very interesting. By understanding the needs of all these users, we could invite them, and we could sort the different functionality and make new sequences in a modular way that would accommodate for more different users' needs. And we ended up then with a much simpler and modular user interface, which has been a huge success for a kind of interface where the standard of the applications has pretty crappy user experiences still, many of them. Are many of you guys using ERP systems day to day? I don't know who many people love registering their hours or taking out hour reports and those kind of things, but it's usually not the best experience. So there's the entrepreneur here to the left, and within 9 months, he had harvested 700 new customers in this new application. And the client satisfaction was actually very, very good. There was a measured customer satisfaction score of 5.1, which was bigger than everyone else. And I found it very, very enjoyable. There's one user who said, Power Office Go, the name of the application, has increased my quality of life. So when we're talking about lovable user interfaces, I think that one was a bullseye. So that's very good. The last one. All right, so this is a little bit existential here. Digital innovation. There's another guy, one of my other heroes. His name is Roberto Verganti. He talks about the change of meaning. He says that you can have 3 different innovation strategies within your company. One, well, that one is actually not one of them. If you do market pull, it's not an innovation strategy. If you're good at listening to your market and then adjust whatever your offerings are to accommodate for your market, it's just market pull. It's not innovation. It's incremental improvements. You can innovate along the axis of only technology, which he calls technology push innovation. So the systems are the same, the solutions are more or less the same, they don't change conceptually, but their performance are boosted. And then you can change along the axis of meaning. And this is where it becomes interesting. And to understand this, there's an experiment that I find a little bit efficient that I want to do with you now. So I'm going to ask all of you to close your eyes for a little moment without falling asleep. And within your minds, you redesign a flower vase. Just look at flower vase. All right, you can open your eyes again. And I'm quite certain that you have made beautiful vases, but that they're quite symmetrical and you can fit a few flowers in it and fill water in it. But if you close your eyes one more time, and I'm going to reframe the challenge. This time I want you to design a new way to experience flowers in your home. Your minds are going crazy with creativity right now, right? You can open your eyes, but the point of this exercise is to investigate how redesigning a vase isn't going to do anything breakthrough. Because you're keeping the system that you have, but you're trying to improve it or just make a new version of the same system that you have. Whereas if you're more oriented around the meaning, then you can design around meaning, and you're going to take a much bigger leap of innovation. And that is innovation along the axis of what we can call design-driven innovation. And furthermore, he says, if you can do that, if you can do change of meaning and you can do change of performance at the same time, you will find the future first. Again, the happy marriage between technology or technologists and designers, which I find very, very fascinating. I think the future, a good future, is dependent on us to cooperate about this. One example is a company called Loadsmart, who is an entrepreneurship, a startup company. They wanted to reinvent the ways things are transported from A to B in North America. They're located in New York. It's quite interesting because you have shippers that need to get stuff from A to B, and you have carriers that need to fill their trucks with something and earn money from it. Now, they were looking at the problem here, each broker spending about 5 hours to execute each shipment. So they are the ones making the matches. Who needs to send stuff and who needs to transport stuff? Making the matches about 5 hours for each shipment. So here are the entrepreneurs. Going to go through this a little bit fast. They said, all right, we have a lot of data. What if we harvest all of this data and we reinvent the way you can do this? So they said, all right, we're going to do the technology, tech-driven innovation. And eggs, you can do the design-driven technology. Let's work together and we're going to reinvent the way to do this. So that's long story short, a lot of crunching on a very holistic, from a very holistic perspective. And we ended up and we found out that the way to do it is to make instant pricing available. So it's almost making an e-commerce version out of their business-to-business brokerage that they had before. So it doesn't have to be precise to start with, but as they dared spitting out this instant pricing thing and then using machine learning to gradually improve the accuracy of what that pricing actually would be. So by doing that, we could make a user interface for the brokers and for the shippers and even for the truck drivers to have a better experience and understand and get more predictability about his job. We also did branding for Loadsmart so that all of this was being communicated in a consistent way and was easy to understand. And the effects was, during the third year of their operation, they had 900,000 quotes, meaning these instant pricing quotes that they had. That's almost 1 million during that year. That's quite a lot. The time it took, that used to take 5 hours to execute a shipment, it now took 18 minutes per shipment. That's a revolution. That's a big step. And also the carriers would receive payments in 2 days instead of 30. But the most important effect, I think, is that they were able to reduce empty miles because all of this was calculated automatically based on machine learning. So empty miles is when a truck will drive a distance without anything, without carrying anything, because they have to go back to where they came from. So using these algorithms, they could match these things more accurately, and hopefully in the future they could reduce it by even more than 8%, but it has a significant environmental improvement. Super cool. And I love this, that one of the founders said they couldn't have made it without eggs, meaning that they appreciate how technologists and designers need to work together to actually to succeed with this kind of solution. So the third one, zoom in. I realize I'm running out of time here. So we've been zooming out now. We're going to zoom in. I'm going to make that a little bit shorter. That is about brand design, it's about GUI design, and it's about design systems. To get visual. What do you need to get so visual? Decision making is surprisingly emotional, and I think creating desirability is something that is becoming even more important as we're moving forward. Second thing now that I mentioned, the global competition, which is raising the bar for this, and your visuals empower your brand value. And your brand is going to be important even in business to business. So we're working now, what we're noticing is that we need to work more and more with design systems. We didn't do that so much before. Now people are interested in making these design systems. This is our definition. It's a practical platform to achieve brand loyalty and GUI consistency across multiple applications over time. It's a pretty good and valuable thing to have. So we haven't approached this. I don't think we're going to go through it, but it has to do with insight and understanding how your organization is going to maintain a design system over time. Because you can't just make it and then you have it. You have to maintain it. So it means something in your organization have to be prepared to have a good, consistent, brand loyal design system over time. An example of this is a project we did for Capitec. Capitec is it was a small company, only 20, 25 people. They were creating a software that was about registering hours and making sure you had enough manning to do your job, for example, in hospitals or hotels or construction workers or factories and so forth. And this is a very good example of a company that a few years back would never have dreamt of spending their money and profits to invest in design and user experience. It was unthinkable. But now they did, and they had a manager who had seen the light and said that, all right, guys, we can't live with this anymore. And looking at it, actually we did some insight with the users who said that they hated the user interface, but the functionality was good. But they hated the interface. It was painful to use it. And they went all the way and said, all right, we're just going to completely rebrand ourselves. So we actually made a new brand, and even a little brand move. I'm going to show it to you.
Capitec jobber hver dag for å redde hele familiens fredagstaco. Capitec hjelper over 400 bedrifter og 60 000 brukere hver dag. I krevende bransjer som avhengig av nøyaktig tidsregistrering og ferdig beregnet lønnsunderlag. Alltid oversikt over tid, ressurser og personell. Våre styringsverktøy sørger for at utbetalinger går når de skal. At sykefravær blir håndtert. At vikaren dukker opp på mandag, og at noen tar imot henne. Ja, at alle ansatte på riktig sted, til riktig tid. Uten for mange tastetrykk og frustrasjoner. En effektiv arbeidsflytt har mange fordeler. For bunnlinja, i arbeidsdagen, på fritida. Så man kan dra hjem til familien med god samvittighet, og la jobb være jobb når man har fri. Så enkelt at det nesten blir gøy.
Yeah, sorry about the Norwegian there. Punchline, so simple that it's almost fun, but not quite, because it's still a boring work tool. But of course, it's much simpler than it used to be. And what I think is cool then is that, so we made this brand, and the brand was also supposed to be an experience through the user interface. So it's not just a facade. It goes through the user interface, and we're using the colors and the topography, we're working with the transitions, making sure that it's consistent all the way into the depth of these applications. So I think they were a very brave organization, only 20, 25 people. They were about to kind of, drop in their revenues. They made this, and they were actually acquired by a larger company called Infotjenester. I think they all experienced that this was a big success. This investment paid off many times. So the ultimate one, find the X factor. I'm going to finish this presentation with the X factor. Who is the king of X factors? I would dare to say it's Elon Musk. Who else would send the Starman in a Tesla out in space and motivate his entire company and get so many fans across the world out of just, pointing out on something that is, you could pretty much call it an X factor. Didn't have much to do with the performance really, but it motivates and moves a lot of people. Getting good at finding X factors is something. I like this kind of thing. To look for the X factor, you have to realize that you have a comfort zone, and the magic rarely happens within that comfort zone. It means you have to challenge yourself, right? I'm going to jump a little bit to get to the last example that I wanted to show you. Ulstein is a company you're probably all aware of. There are two things, actually. They're a shipyard, and they're also delivering maritime equipment and user interfaces for automation. So Ulstein is known for these ships. It's called the X-Bow. It was rated one of the greatest innovations of Norway through all time, some time ago. And I think that the reason they got so much attention is their link to the Viking ships. It moves something within the DNA of every Norwegian. If it has anything to do with Vikings, We love it. And they have a chief visionary there called Tore Ulstein, and he said, we have to do the same for the interfaces. So they made this Ulstein bridge vision that was shown off at Nordshipping some years after. But the problem was that this vision was really far from reality. Reality looked like this. Extreme complexity, massive requirements and restrictions. Every delivery had to be tailored. So they couldn't really just invest in one user interface and then just ship that, because they all needed to be tailored for their new deliveries, their new ships. Engineering costs, they had to cut on engineering costs, and the reality was that even though the bridge vision looked sexy, the bridges there was a battle to get space in the bridges, because there are so many different companies delivering equipment. So how can you make a unified look and feel there? So the project manager said, okay, the vision is great, but can you help us with reality, please? So that was the project, actually. So we would co-create the new standard. So the project was 3 things. It was to maintain the X factor from the vision that they had. It was to take all the functionality of their existing solution and add user insight to find their new user experience. So this project lasted for about 9 months, doing workshops and having card sorting exercises with users, mapping and prioritizing functionality and so forth. And we ended up with a user interface which is now implemented and that they're very proud of. Careful use of colors so that alarms really can pop out. One-click access to most of the important functionality that you need, for example, to acknowledge alarms. One-click mega menu where you can get access to all the different pages within the interface. We have something called the alert star, which shows you the distribution of alerts on your ship over time. And a way to kind of navigate through the alert star. The users would use pattern recognition to understand what had happened to your ship. All the direct controls within the so-called mimics, where you can control all the equipment in your ship through this remote user interface. So you could click on the valves, for example, to close it and open it again. And again, a consistent user interface created by a design system with attention to details in the implementation. This is implemented in Qt. And we received a pretty good result, where the X factor, of course, is the alert star. So now is this moment of trying to find out, could we find a bridge here? How did the Vikings navigate again? Oh, they navigated by the stars. So the stars. It was worth a shot, right? So that's the X factor, and that's pretty much what they're using. Actually, it's not very useful, because no captains, no automation engineers will ever, I think, understand the pattern recognitions and so forth. But this has become the face and the pride of the new Ulstein UX interface right now. You can see how proud they were. So this wraps up what I wanted to tell you and the secrets to achieve lovable UX. I hope you all feel empowered and better equipped to go and be ambassadors to create even better user experiences in the future. Thank you for listening, and feel free to follow me on LinkedIn if you want to see more of my posts and updates about this topic and other things related to innovation. Thanks.